In the year 1347, as autumn winds carried the scent of damp earth through the cramped villages of medieval Europe, most peasants awoke long before sunrise, unaware that the world around them was on the brink of collapse. This was the age when the Black Death would soon devastate the continent, and every aspect of daily life, including hygiene, would shape one's survival. But long before the plague arrived, hygiene for medieval peasants had already played a silent but powerful role in daily routines, social structure, and even life expectancy. To understand what cleanliness meant for the common people of the Middle Ages, one must step deeply into their world, where mud floors, smoke, filled huts, lice, infested bedding, and communal bathhouses told a story far more complex than the myth of dirty medieval Europe. Hygiene for peasants in the Middle Ages begins with understanding their living conditions. A typical peasant family lived in a structure known as a cruck house, built from timber frames and walls packed with wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. These homes were dark, with a single room shared by the entire family, animals included. The warmth generated by pigs, goats, or a cow inside the house made winter survivable, but it also intensified the smell. The hearth in the center of the home burned every day, not only for cooking, but also to produce smoke that helped reduce insects and preserve food. This continuous smoke stained the walls and ceiling black, and left the air thick and irritating. Yet it was also the closest thing to sanitation many villagers knew. Without chimneys in many homes, the smoke slowly escaped through thatched roofs, carrying with it soot and grime that settled everywhere. Body hygiene was limited by necessity. Most peasants washed only once or twice a week, not because they avoided cleanliness, but because water sources were scarce, cold, and often contaminated. Streams and rivers served multiple purposes: drinking, washing clothes, cleaning tools, watering animals, and sometimes even dumping waste. Peasants understood that water downstream was dirtier than water upstream, so villages often implemented informal rules regarding where washing and water collection took place. However, during long winters, frozen rivers made washing almost impossible, and villagers resorted to wiping themselves with rough cloths or using oils and ash mixtures to clean their skin. Bathing, when possible, was more common than many modern myths suggest. Medieval Europeans, including peasants, enjoyed bathing when resources permitted it. Bathhouses existed in towns, but rural peasants rarely had access to them, and their baths were usually outdoors in wooden tubs shared among family members. Hot water required firewood, a valuable resource peasants could not waste lightly. Families prioritized cooking and warmth over personal baths, meaning that bathing was often saved for festivals, holy days, or warmer seasons. On special occasions, herbs such as lavender, rosemary, thyme, and mint were added to bath water for fragrance and mild disinfectant properties. These herbs grew in cottage gardens and were among the few forms of medieval hygiene accessible to the poor. Clothing hygiene was a more practical routine. Peasants rarely owned more than 2 sets of clothes. Their garments, made of wool or linen, absorbed sweat, dirt, and smoke, but they were washed far more frequently than the body itself. Washing clothes was labor-intensive. Women trekked to rivers or communal washing areas with wooden paddles, ash soap, and boiling water. Ash, when mixed with water, created a primitive form of lye, harsh but effective. Clothes were beaten, scrubbed on rocks, soaked, and laid across bushes or ropes to dry in the sun, which acted as a natural disinfectant. Sunlight was one of the most underestimated hygiene tools in medieval life. Many peasants hung bedding outside for the same reason. The sun helped kill fleas and lice, though not permanently. Lice, fleas, and other parasites were constant companions. Medieval sources mentioned them frequently, and peasants regarded them as an unavoidable fact of life. Without chemical insecticides, villagers relied on folk remedies. Combing hair with narrow wooden or bone combs helped reduce lice. Shaving the head was another method used occasionally during outbreaks of illness. Bedding was regularly aired out or heated near the fire to drive insects away. Some peasants even sprinkled herbs like wormwood or rue into bedding to ward off pests. These techniques were imperfect but practical within their limited resources. Toilets for medieval peasants were rudimentary. Most families used a simple pit latrine dug outside the home, often shared by multiple households. These pits were shallow and needed to be relocated once filled, contributing to the smell and presence of flies. In many rural areas, people relieved themselves in fields or behind bushes, particularly in winter when latrines froze. Inside homes, chamber pots were used during the night, especially by women, children, and the elderly. These pots were emptied each morning, but in densely packed villages, waste disposal was inconsistent. Some threw waste far from the house, while others dumped it in ditches or roads, causing contamination that would later play a tragic role during the plague. Dental hygiene was another challenge. Toothbrushes as we know them did not exist, but peasants chewed on sticks, rubbed crushed charcoal on teeth, or rinsed with cold water. Dental problems were widespread, though surprisingly, cavities were less common than later centuries because sugar consumption was extremely low. Bread made from coarse grains, however, wore down teeth, causing fractures and infections at young ages. Hand washing was one of the most significant hygiene practices of medieval peasants. Despite the absence of modern soap, people cleaned their hands frequently, especially before meals. Hand-washing bowls were common household items, and many families used mixtures of warm water and ash or sand to scrub away dirt. This habit was encouraged by both custom and religion. The Church promoted washing before prayer and sacred rituals, making cleanliness not only practical but spiritual. Many medieval texts describe washing as a sign of respect and purity. Water contamination, however, remained a major issue. Wells were safer than rivers, but were still vulnerable to pollution. Animals wandered freely in villages, leaving waste that washed into water sources. During heavy rains, filth from roads and livestock pens flowed into streams. The peasant ability to recognize clean water was based on smell, taste, and tradition rather than science, leaving them vulnerable to dysentery, cholera-like illnesses, and stomach infections. Hygiene was also influenced by social structure. Lords and nobles had access to better clothing, perfumes, private baths, and servants to manage waste. Monks, interestingly, had the cleanest lifestyles of the medieval world. Monastic rules required regular bathing, shaving, and laundering. Peasants living near monasteries sometimes benefited from this influence, adopting better hygiene practices or using monastic infirmaries for medical care. Seasonal changes shaped cleanliness. Spring and summer allowed for more bathing, washing, and outdoor waste disposal. Autumn brought mud that clung to homes, clothes, and floors. Winter forced families indoors, where smoke, breath, sweat, and animal smells mixed into a thick atmosphere. By February or March, a medieval peasant home often carried layers of accumulated grime that simply couldn't be avoided. Yet despite these challenges, medieval peasants were far from indifferent to hygiene. Their routines were shaped by practicality. They cleaned what they could, preserved what they must, and adapted to the harsh reality of limited resources. Hygiene was not a luxury, it was survival. The rhythms of washing clothes, airing bedding, controlling pests, managing waste, and maintaining modest personal cleanliness created a world more nuanced than the stereotype of dirty peasants. The world of medieval peasants in the mid-14th century was shaped by routines that revolved around survival, and nowhere was this more evident than in their daily hygiene practices. From sunrise to sunset, every task they performed carried an unintended influence on their cleanliness, their health, and even their social reputation. As we move deeper into the daily rhythm of a typical village, we see how hygiene was not a simple matter of washing or bathing, but an entire system dictated by nature, religion, community expectations, and scarcity. A medieval peasant began the morning by tending animals, and this was the source of much of their daily contact with filth. Pigs roamed freely outside and sometimes inside the home. Sheep needed herding, cows needed milking, and all animals left droppings that accumulated in pens and along roads. Most villagers walked barefoot or in simple leather shoes, meaning that contact with mud mixed with animal waste was a constant reality. Washing feet at night became a small but important ritual, especially in warmer months. Women filled wooden bowls with cold water to rinse the dirt from the day, while men often wiped their legs and feet with rough cloths. Full body cleaning was rare, but small acts like these helped maintain a sense of dignity. Inside the home, sweeping was a daily task. Floors were made of packed dirt, and straw was spread periodically to keep moisture down and provide insulation. As straw became soaked with spills, ash, and animal droppings, it was replaced, though not daily. In most homes, new straw was added once a week or once every 2 weeks, depending on the season. This layer absorbed sweat, smoke residue, and the oils from human skin. Despite its dirtiness, straw was practical, inexpensive, and renewable. Cleanliness for a medieval peasant was always a negotiation between what was ideal and what was possible. Cooking and hygiene intertwined. Meals were prepared on the central hearth using iron pots, wooden bowls, and clay cups. These dishes were cleaned using water, mixed with ash, or merely wiped clean using grass or cloth. Boiling water in pots served as a form of sterilization, and peasants intuitively understood that hot water removed foul odors. Many households kept a small barrel of water inside for cooking and cleaning, but this water had to be carried from the river or well, making it precious. Women often walked long distances carrying wooden buckets, straining their backs and arms. Because of this labor, water was never wasted on unnecessary washing. Hygiene was also regulated by the church calendar. Certain feast days encouraged bathing or washing hands as acts of purity before attending Mass. Priests preached about cleanliness of the soul more than the body, but medieval villagers found ways to blend both concepts. Washing before prayer became a habitual practice, and peasants washed their hands and faces more frequently than most people assume. In wealthier villages, communal wash basins were placed near church entrances, allowing villagers to refresh themselves before entering. In poorer hamlets, people used shared wooden buckets placed outside homes or wells. Hair care was another important part of daily hygiene. Medieval peasants rarely cut their hair short unless facing lice outbreaks or illness. Washing hair with water alone was common, but some used herbal mixtures made from nettles, rosemary, or boiled barley water to improve scalp health. Women braided their hair to keep it clean and prevent tangling, while men often tied theirs back with leather straps. Lice remained a daily battle, and combing sessions were common. Family routines, especially in the evenings. Mothers combed their children's hair with narrow, toothed wooden combs, crushing lice between fingernails or wiping them on cloth. This was not seen as disgusting, but rather a normal household chore similar to washing clothes. Clothing also influenced hygiene more than anything else. A peasant's outer garments were made of wool, which resisted moisture and absorbed odors over time. Underclothes, typically linen shifts or shirts worn directly against the skin, absorbed sweat and body oils. These linen garments were washed the most often, usually every few days or at least once a week. Washing linen required boiling water over the hearth, mixing it with ash soap, and then scrubbing the cloth on wooden boards or river stones. Women gathered by the riverbanks to wash clothes, sharing news and discussing village matters. These communal washing sessions served as the medieval version of public hygiene. While the act itself was laborious, it reinforced social bonds and allowed older women to pass down practical knowledge to younger generations. Waste disposal shaped daily hygiene as much as bathing or washing. Human waste was managed through pit latrines, but many villages lacked enough pits for everyone. Some peasants relieved themselves in open fields or behind barns, especially while working long hours outdoors. This was not seen as shameful. It was simply part of farm life. Waste from animals accumulated rapidly, especially during winter when animals were kept inside. Families shoveled manure into piles that would later serve as fertilizer. This created a constant cycle of moving waste from one area to another, and while it contributed to the strong smells of medieval life, it was also a key part of agricultural survival. Smell, for medieval villagers, was not a sign of filth in the same way modern people interpret it. They associated certain odors with life, productivity, and work. Cleanliness was judged more by visible dirt than by scent. Water quality was the greatest concern, though often misunderstood. While peasants did not know about bacteria, they relied heavily on experience. They avoided drinking water from stagnant ponds, preferring flowing rivers or wells. Some added ale or vinegar to their water to mask unpleasant taste, unknowingly reducing harmful microbes. Brewing ale was, in fact, a crucial part of medieval hygiene. Because ale required boiling water during preparation, it became one of the safest drinks available. Children drank weak ale daily, and adults consumed stronger varieties. This reliance on ale, often interpreted as a sign of constant drunkenness, was actually a survival tactic rooted in hygiene. Seasonal routines created patterns in cleanliness. In spring, the thaw allowed for thorough cleaning of homes. Women scrubbed walls with wet cloths, swept out accumulated ash, and beat bedding outdoors. Summer offered opportunities for outdoor bathing in shallow rivers. Families washed entire bodies during festivals or after long days of work. Autumn brought mud that clung to clothes and legs, requiring more frequent foot washing and garment rinsing. Winter was the hardest season, with frozen water sources and crowded homes. Hygiene routines focused on conserving heat and resources rather than cleanliness. Despite these hardships, peasants adapted with remarkable flexibility. Hygiene was not only physical but social. Villagers judged each other based on appearance. Someone who neglected washing hands before meals or allowed clothing to become visibly filthy was seen as irresponsible or lazy. Community reputation mattered deeply in medieval life. A clean household indicated discipline, respectability, and moral standing. Even poor families strove to keep their homes swept and their clothes mended, understanding that cleanliness carried social weight. Thus, the hygiene practices of medieval peasants were shaped by necessity, custom, labor, and survival. They were far from careless or primitive. Rather, they used every resource available to maintain a basic standard of cleanliness within the harsh conditions of their lives. Their world may appear dirty to modern eyes, but within the context of the Middle Ages, their routines reveal a community deeply attentive to practical cleanliness, guided by wisdom passed down through generations. The deeper we move into the world of medieval peasants, the clearer it becomes that hygiene was not simply a set of habits, but a reflection of their entire relationship with nature, disease, and survival. By the late 14th century, especially after the Black Death ravaged Europe between 1347 and 1351, the subject of cleanliness gained new meaning. Villagers began noticing patterns, even without scientific knowledge. They observed that filth attracted sickness, that people living near waste pits became ill more often, and that overcrowded homes with poor ventilation led to more fevers and coughing. These observations were far from perfect, but they pushed medieval communities towards small, incremental improvements in hygiene. Life in a medieval village was governed by routine, and each routine shaped the body. Early mornings began with chores that covered peasants in dust, sweat, and the earthy smell of livestock. Hygiene had to fit into this relentless schedule. Even without modern soap, peasants used natural materials such as clay, ash, crushed herbs, and sand as abrasives to clean their hands and nails. Children were taught from an early age how to wash in cold water before eating. Meals were communal, often shared from a single bowl, making hand-washing even more important. Many villages had a shared wooden basin placed on a small stand outside a household. and family members washed their hands in a set order, father first, then mother, followed by the children. Water in the basin was reused until it became too cloudy, and then it was thrown outdoors, usually near the vegetable garden, where nutrients in the water enriched the soil. The church strengthened these habits. Priests reminded villagers before Mass to wash their faces and hands. Though the church emphasized spiritual cleanliness, physical cleanliness often accompanied it. In some places, the churchyard well became the community's cleanest water source because it was maintained by clergy rather than peasants. People began to differentiate between clean and unclean spaces, not based on germs, which they did not understand, but based on what the church allowed, what experience taught, and what elders passed down orally. These informal rules helped shape hygiene in ways that are often overlooked. Hygiene also extended to grooming. Medieval peasants trimmed nails regularly using small knives or metal tools. Long, dirty nails were associated with laziness, especially among men whose work required handling tools, ropes, and animals. Teeth cleaning was done using sticks or cloth. Peasants chewed on the ends of willow or hazel branches to create a brush-like texture, then rubbed this across their teeth. Some applied salt or crushed charcoal to the cloth for extra cleaning power. Though this caused wear on the enamel, it also removed food residue effectively. Mouthwash was rare, but rinsing with cold water after meals was common, especially after eating oily foods like cheese or fatty meat on feast days. Waste management became increasingly structured after the Black Death. Many villages created designated dumping areas outside the settlement known as middens. Households deposited food scraps, broken pottery, and manure in these pits. Archaeologists have found that these middens were layered with straw and ash, suggesting that peasants attempted to reduce smells and slow decay. Ash acted as a mild disinfectant, absorbing moisture and deterring flies. Though basic by modern standards, this was a surprisingly effective method to keep waste away from living areas. Water sources were another part of the hygiene system. Villages often competed over access to clean wells or flowing streams. Some communities created simple rules: upstream for drinking water, midstream for washing clothes, downstream for cleaning tools and animals. These rules were not always followed perfectly, but they reduced contamination enough to prevent constant outbreaks of illness. Women carried the responsibility of enforcing such rules, as they were the primary collectors of water. Their knowledge of water cleanliness, gained through experience, was essential. They smelled the water, checked its clarity, and avoided collecting after heavy rains when runoff made the river muddy. This instinctive understanding preserved the health of many families. Bathing, though not daily, remained valued throughout medieval life. On warm summer days, villagers often walked to shallow riverbanks to wash themselves. Men sometimes bathed shirtless in groups, laughing and splashing water, while women bathed downstream or earlier in the day for privacy. Bathing was a communal moment, a break from endless labor. Children played in the water, and older villagers sat on rocks to cleanse their arms and legs. Some brought simple soaps made from tallow and lye, though these were harsh and used sparingly. Bathing with herbs added a pleasant scent and was believed to protect against bad air, a concept linked to medieval theories of disease. Personal care items were simple but meaningful. Wooden combs, linen towels, woven cloths, and small washing bowls were prized household possessions. Mothers taught daughters how to wash cloth diapers for babies using hot water and ash soap. Fathers taught sons how to clean tools and wash mud out of wool garments. These skills were not luxuries. They were essential for maintaining health in a world full of hazards. Hygiene also shaped gender roles. Women were expected to keep homes clean, wash clothing, tend to children, and prepare meals. Cleanliness in the home became a sign of womanly virtue. A well-kept house brought respect. Men, meanwhile, were responsible for managing waste outdoors, cleaning animal pens, and washing tools. While both genders contributed to hygiene, the expectations varied. reflecting social norms of the time. Seasonal festivals often included rituals of purification. Before major celebrations like Easter or Pentecost, households engaged in thorough cleaning. Walls were wiped, floors were scrubbed, and old straw was replaced with fresh layers. These cleaning rituals were symbolic as well as practical, marking a transition from one season to another and preparing the home for holy days. When baths were taken during festivals, herbs were used not only for cleanliness, but also for their symbolic meaning of renewal and rebirth. Illness played a major role in shaping hygiene habits. When epidemics spread, villagers looked to past experiences for guidance. Some believed that burning aromatic herbs in homes purified the air. Others believed in washing more frequently to ward off disease. Though these practices were not scientifically accurate, they were attempts to make sense of the invisible threats that haunted medieval life. People recognized patterns even without understanding causes. They noticed that cleaner households had fewer flies and fewer fevers. They noticed that dirty water caused stomach troubles. This practical knowledge, passed through generations, formed the heart of peasant hygiene. Social interaction reinforced hygiene rules. Villagers gossiped about households with poor hygiene. A family who allowed waste to collect near their door or permitted children to run around unwashed developed a bad reputation. Community pressure encouraged better habits. Even among the poorest families, public appearance mattered. Clothes might be old or patched, but they were kept as clean as the family's resources allowed. The overall effect of these practices created a surprisingly stable hygiene system for medieval peasants. It was not modern, scientific, or luxurious, but it was functional and grounded in experience. Their world was filled with challenges modern people rarely face: limited water, constant exposure to dirt, no chemical cleaners, no plumbing, no medical understanding of disease. Yet within these harsh limits, they crafted hygiene routines that kept society functioning and allowed communities to endure famine, war, and plague. By the 15th century, the habits and survival instincts of medieval peasants had formed a hygiene culture that was deeply rooted in practicality, tradition, and community memory. While their world lacked scientific understanding, it did not lack wisdom. Every action, from heating water to hanging bedding in the sun, was a calculated choice shaped by generations who lived close to the land. Section 4 explores the wider consequences of their hygiene practices, how these customs influenced public health, how they shifted over time, and how the medieval understanding of cleanliness helped shape the early modern world. One of the most important consequences of peasant hygiene was its impact on disease. The Middle Ages were marked by recurring waves of illness, from small outbreaks of dysentery to catastrophic events like the Black Death. While peasants lacked concepts like bacteria or viruses, they slowly built a body of practical knowledge about avoiding illness. They realized that foul, smelling areas brought sickness more often. They noticed that waste near wells or water sources led to stomach problems. They observed that lice and fleas flourished in unwashed bedding, and that families who cleaned their bed straw more frequently avoided some illnesses. Over time, these observations created informal but powerful hygiene standards. Villagers began relocating waste pits farther from homes. They improved latrine construction. They used ash more systematically to cover filth. These small improvements mattered. Although hygiene alone could not stop plague-level diseases spread by fleas on rats, it did reduce the spread of dated illnesses that frequently weakened peasant communities. Even without scientific tools, medieval peasants learned to adapt, using environmental observation to shape healthy behaviors. These adaptations reveal that hygiene was not static. It evolved as society faced new challenges, proving that medieval villagers were far more observant and adaptable than modern stereotypes suggest. The economic structure of villages also shaped cleanliness. Peasants lived in dense social networks. Homes were close together, open fields were shared, water sources were communal, and labor bound people together. One household's habits inevitably affected the whole village. For example, when a family emptied their chamber pot near a common footpath, everyone suffered from the smell and flies. When a neighbor washed clothes upstream, others gained cleaner water downstream. This interconnectedness pushed villagers to enforce community rules on hygiene, from where waste could be dumped to how animal pens should be maintained. Village councils or elders often mediated disputes over hygiene issues. They settled disagreements about access to wells, rights to clean water, or the location of new latrines. These decisions were not considered minor. They carried consequences for daily life, crop productivity, and health. The idea that rural medieval life was chaotic or unmanaged is incorrect. Many villages functioned through clear rules, inherited customs, and collective responsibility. Hygiene was a shared duty. Clothing hygiene had long-term consequences too. Clean linen was not only practical but symbolic. It represented respectability and social order. Even among the poorest families, washing linen undergarments was prioritized. When visitors arrived, villagers judged their cleanliness based on the brightness of their linen, the absence of visible dirt, and the care taken in mending tears. Clean clothes signaled discipline, and a tidy household signaled moral uprightness. These values persisted for centuries, eventually influencing early modern ideas about virtue, household management, and women's roles. Bathing customs also left a legacy. Although daily bathing was uncommon, peasants enjoyed warm baths during festivals or harvest celebrations. Bathing became associated with renewal and community unity. Over time, public bathhouses expanded in some regions, especially near towns. Even rural villagers visited town bathhouses during markets or religious festivals. These bathhouses became gathering places where cleanliness blended with social interaction. Some bathhouses offered herbal baths, which peasants valued not just for cleanliness, but for their perceived healing effects. This blending of hygiene and health laid the cultural foundation for later European spa traditions. Water management improved gradually as well. By the late medieval period, some villages began building more durable wells lined with stone. Others installed wooden covers to keep animals from falling in or contaminating the water. Communal washing areas gained small improvements such as wooden planks for scrubbing or designated basins for hand washing. These enhancements show the evolution of medieval hygiene into something more structured and thoughtful than the rough practices of earlier centuries. One of the most overlooked consequences of peasant hygiene was its connection to agriculture. Waste recycling was essential in medieval farming. Human and animal waste enriched fields, increasing crop yields. While this practice risked spreading disease when mismanaged, it also supported food production and sustained communities. Villagers learned to age manure properly and avoid spreading fresh waste during planting seasons. This knowledge blended hygiene with agricultural science long before these fields were formally studied. Hygiene also influenced spirituality. The Church encouraged washing before entering holy spaces, linking moral purity with physical cleanliness. Baptismal water symbolized renewal, and villagers often purified themselves before feast days through washing rituals. This spiritual framing made cleanliness more meaningful, embedding hygiene routines into religious life. Even confessions included questions about household care or cleanliness, showing how deeply the concepts intertwined. Children learned hygiene through imitation. Mothers taught them how to wash their hands in the morning, how to rinse their faces, how to avoid dirty water, and how to hang clothes to dry. Boys learned from their fathers how to maintain tools, clean boots, and keep animal stalls orderly. These lessons shaped adulthood, creating a continuity of knowledge that survived across generations. This transmission ensured that medieval hygiene, though imperfect, remained consistent and resilient. As Europe moved closer to the Renaissance, new ideas about medicine and health began to circulate. Universities rediscovered ancient texts, doctors began studying anatomy, and cities developed early forms of sanitation. While peasants remained distant from these intellectual shifts, their own hygiene practices formed the baseline from which later improvements emerged. When bathhouses modernized, villages were already familiar with collective bathing. When cities built drainage systems, villagers had centuries of experience managing waste collectively. When physicians emphasized clean air, peasants remembered the lessons of pest outbreaks and bedding ventilation. Thus, the hygiene practices of medieval peasants were not a forgotten footnote in history, but a foundation for future public health. Their daily struggle against dirt, insects, and disease shaped a culture of survival rooted in observation and experience. Their resourcefulness in using ash, herbs, sunlight, and water laid the groundwork for later sanitation methods. Their communal approach to shared spaces influenced modern health policies built on collective responsibility. In the end, medieval peasant hygiene was a complex system shaped by necessity, belief, tradition, and adaptation. It reflected a world where survival demanded constant awareness of the environment. It shaped families, villages, and economies. And even though it lacked the scientific precision of modern sanitation, it was a testament to human resilience in harsh conditions. Medieval peasants were far from ignorant or careless. They were innovators within the limits of their world, finding ways to maintain cleanliness and health using only what nature provided.